Hi, everyone. So I'm Rael. I used to work in industrial design at CPUT, which is specifically around product design. So I've been in education for a while, and then recently joined the D School at the beginning of the year, which is the Hasselplattner Institute of Design Thinking at the University of Cape Town, hence the name D School. It's much less of a mouthful. It already cut into the first 2 minutes of this presentation. So what we do there is we work with diverse sets of students from across UCT, as well as executive education training, but specifically around design thinking. So I'm going to be speaking from a design thinking perspective today, and not necessarily specifically around skills, but rather the underpinning mindset. So what we found is, you can teach skills and knowledge, but essentially, if people don't have the right attitudes or mindset, kind of the why they're doing it, it's quite difficult to implement. So I'm going to be focusing more around kind of attitudes and mindsets today that underpin a lot of design thinking and design thinking processes. Essentially moving from methodology to mindset, which is the kind of the learning journey we try and take students through. So here we're looking at the values, the attitudes, and beliefs that underpin the know-how and the skills. So design thinking there's a lot of thought processes and a lot of different ways to kind of approach it. I quite like these kind of underpinning design thinking aspects, looking at, referential thought, understanding meaning. Meaning is a huge component of what we do. People have different worldviews and attach different meanings to different things based on their experiences. And we need to understand that within a team, as well as going and working with individuals outside of that space. There's also relational thought, formative, procedural, evaluative, and reflective. On the side of reflection, we essentially design is a reflective practice, where we reflect during the practice and feedback those learnings into the process as we continue. So there's lots of loops, lots of iteration that happens within the process itself. I don't know how many of you are familiar with design thinking itself. Just a show of hands, quick. Cool, okay. So what I'll do is just basically, a lot of us are in a very much a kind of problem-solving mode, where we look at this kind of rational, analytic approach, where this is the issue, okay, let's solve it based on what we know. Design thinking shifts to more of an emergent process, where the challenge actually emerges from engagement. And we reframe that challenge, or frame that challenge, through interaction, through the work of empathy, through really engaging with people. So it's very much a people, human-centric approach. So the goals, the challenge, and everything emerges through the process. So what I'm going to speak to do specifically of kind of 4 key aspects of what a design thinking mindset actually is made up of. The first is a shift in focus from products to people. So it's not necessarily designing something and then putting it out there, spending a lot of time marketing and testing. It's rather about let's enter the process through the discovery of needs or aspirations of people. So it's around very much kind of that human-centric, empathic approaches that lead into the design thinking process. We sort of frame innovation around these 3 main kind of spheres. Desirability, i.e. what do people want, what do people need, what do people aspire to as they go forward. Viability, what is possible within the business. And then technology, what's feasible, what can we do. We find a lot of time industry works within the bottom 2 and then tests those assumptions or those ideas with what people actually want. Our focus within design thinking is very much around the desirability first. So it's really about going out and engaging with people. We have project partners, we work with project partners from industry, from local government, NGOs, and they come to us with a challenge. And there's often we find a disconnect between how they see the challenge and how those who might be receiving the product or service system see the challenge. And so what we do is we'll take that challenge and reframe it according to users within that space. So essentially what we're talking about is we understand that people all have, I don't know if this is a pointer, yes. People all come from these different backgrounds, and there's this kind of this rich challenge space that we engage with. And those people's different experiences day to day, whether it's the lived experiences or whether it's in what they've been taught. They perceive things differently. And so what we do is we kind of form these small teams which engage with people around a specific challenge. They explore that challenge, and then they synthesize those findings into what we call a POV, or a point of view. And that point of view reframes the challenge through the lens of the recipients, or the users, or people within that space. We then go through a more solution space, which is ideation, prototyping, testing, refining, and iterating. So there's a lot of testing, a lot of failing early and often, and then testing that and bringing in that feedback. Although not all the time, what we often see is, startups or people will have an idea and they'll go out and test it, and that's the engagement, that's the user engagement, that component. But we often see that more related to kind of incremental innovation, which is more about testing existing ideas. What we're really interested in is actually new idea finding. So it's not necessarily knowing what the answer is, but let's engage in this process and let's see what emerges from it, and where the interventions could be. And that sort of takes us, I guess, to the second main kind of component of a design thinking mindset, which is the shift in focus from problem solving to problem finding. And that might sound strange when we know how many issues there are, and we try and solve problems as designers. But essentially what we're doing is trying to enter this design thinking phase, or the design thinking process, in a more explorative manner. It's more around identifying what is the real issue. So we prefer to spend more time in the front end of design, that kind of messy front end that we might be familiar with. And then spend more time trying to find what the right question is and then answer it together, as opposed to trying to spend a lot of time answering what could be the wrong question. So yeah, it's really this process of this kind of discovery-driven mindset where, and it's not a comfortable space at the beginning. There's no real kind of, this is what we're going to be doing, or this is the solution. It's really about engaging. And it's far more of a market pull and a technology push approach, which we see in innovation. So instead of spending large amounts of money saying marketing and trying to convince people to buy your product, or your product buy into your product service system, we spend this more time up front exploring the different aspirations and needs within a market, within a user group, within kind of that market. We find that when in problem solving mode, one's focus can narrow too much, focus specifically on that problem, and the kind of blinkers come on and you don't really see these peripheral issues or the problems behind the problems. And essentially by adopting this more of an explorative approach, we try and ask more why questions. So you don't just deal with the problem at hand, but what gave rise to it? Let's go explore that. Let's look into the issues behind the problems. So again, starting in this divergent phase. If we look at this, so we kind of less from this problem solving, more around tame problems, where we kind of play more in this problem finding space, wicked problems. So that requires also a lot of different types of people in the room. We don't just work with designers. In fact, none of our students are necessarily designers. And we work with kind of the quad helix space, where we've got academia, we've got private partners, government, as well as citizens. And within that problem finding space, it's quite difficult to kind of tie down. So again, wicked problems are there's a lot of space that we're in, and that's this kind of rather uncomfortable space. And a wicked problem is something that doesn't have a direct solution. So we actually need to find out what the issue is. So for example, something like homelessness. What is the solution? There's no kind of one solution. It's really a series of solutions, or series of working through the issue, where you might find these kind of points of tension or pain points within that space where you can actually look at intervening. So what we do is, through the design thinking process, we try and move from this vision of kind of a complicated, amorphous issue into more of understanding it as a complex system, and the different components that make this up. From this first engagement, something might look really complex, but as we engage with it more and more through this discovery-driven mindset, we start to realize the different pieces that go, and we can start to pick out intervention points. And then the third frame is the ability to combine complex and disparate factors, this kind of integrative thinking. And I know Roger Martin speaks of this now, but it's kind of been going on for quite a while. And essentially that's about how do we put these different ideas together. So again, like I said, working in a diverse team, people from diverse backgrounds, diverse, both culturally, both in terms of their discipline. How do people speak together? How do we relate to one another? And we don't see empathy as an outward exercise, which is often framed as, but rather internal first. So our students really spend a lot of time getting to know each other and getting to know each other's stories, and that influences how they perceive what they put out there. So people might make suggestions that at first, if you don't know that person, seem a bit odd or seem in sort of tension with your own. But understanding where people come from is very important for us. So we work beyond silos. Like I said, we don't work within a specific discipline, but transversely. And we work with more kind of integrated work communities. And this requires this integrative thinking, this idea to put these different ideas together. And during the discovery phase, this is important because there might be a lot of opinions, assumptions in the room, and how do you put these together in the best possible way to frame a challenge. But then also within the problem-solving space, when you've got hundreds of ideas of how to possibly approach the challenge, how do you put those ideas together as well? So it's kind of throughout the whole process, we're looking at this. So again, wicked problems can't be solved by a single entity. So we're looking at, often, like I said, working across disciplines, across public, private sectors. And we need designers to kind of be comfortable within this space. How do you take into consideration all these different perspectives and come up with a challenge that sincerely meets these objectives and sincerely meets people's needs and aspirations? And then the fourth one that I'll mention is this abductive reasoning. I think we might be more familiar with inductive and deductive. So for example, inductive is kind of this generalizing of existing ideas, existing choices. So for example, if not this, then this might work, then this, then this. But we're in a space of abductive reasoning, which essentially looks at kind of creating this new knowledge or allowing you to take creative leaps. So not necessarily drawing just on what you know and what does exist, but what could exist. And this is how we ground design thinking and ground design approaches in the real world. And that's the idea of kind of futuring, where we imagine these futures and then try and develop them. So it's not just saying, what we often find, for example, is that we're working with people who've been solving the same or solving problems in the same manner, but not necessarily solving them. So what we try and do in design is actually develop these new ways of solving challenges. And that happens best, like I said, when we work together in integrative teams from different disciplines, and then framing the challenge as well as solving it. So it's that shift from a either or to a kind of what could be space. So the mindset that then underpins the idea of design thinking is essentially these four components. That's shifting from products to people, a human-centric approach. The shift in focus from problem solving to problem finding, this more kind of expansive beginning of a problem as opposed to entering just to solve. Really about trying to find what the issues are. The ability to combine these different mindsets, different suggestions, different opinions, and then how to ground those in a kind of creative manner. So to me, within design thinking and in design-led innovation, these four mindsets are key. These are, I've been painting in rather broad brush strokes because there's a lot of key skills and knowledge as well in kind of how you implement this. But what underpins it all are these four kind of key areas that we try and we try and engage with people and and educate through. And I think if people best adopt these mindsets, we can find new solutions to challenges as opposed to just draw on what it does exist already. And essentially that's kind of what the design thinking approach is within innovation or within business, is looking at new ways of doing things, not just drawing from an existing kind of repository. Thank you.